Stories Between Lives. The granddaughter of Doa Remedios Luca got down from the wagon with a single chest and her head held high. The driver didn't even help her. He left the chest in the mud, clicked his tongue at the mules, and went off, leaving her alone in front of an adobe house that had gone years without anyone wanting it. Welcome to Stories Between Lives. This is the story of a young woman they sent to the countryside to suffer for saying a single word, no. The wind came down cold from the Sierra of Michoacán. It smelled of wet earth and old firewood. Luca was 22 years old and had the soft hands of someone who had never worked the land. Until 3 days before, she had lived in a big house in the town with a maid and a tablecloth on the table. She had Sunday dresses, buckled shoes, a big mirror to look at herself in. And yet, in that house full of things, she had never felt entirely in her place. Everything changed the morning of her engagement. Her father, Don Atilano, had arranged her wedding to Heriberto Vargas, owner of the only company store in the region. A man of 48, twice widowed, with a reputation for squeezing his debtors until he left them without land. For Don Atilano, it was good business. For Luca, it was a sentence. "I'm not going to marry him, father," said Luca, in front of the whole family gathered in the parlor. "I don't love him, and I'm never going to love him." A silence fell that cut the air. Don Atilano set the cup on the table. Slowly, he didn't shout. What he said was worse. A daughter who shames her father in front of a man like Heriberto doesn't deserve to eat at his table. "You're going to your grandmother's ranch, the one in the Sierra, alone, to see if the countryside teaches you what this house didn't. And you don't come back until you come to your senses." Luca felt the words like a dry blow. But she didn't lower her head. She wanted to say something. The voice wouldn't come. In the parlor, the clock went on with its tick-tock, indifferent, as if nothing were breaking. Her mother looked at the floor. Her two sisters looked at the floor. Her older sister, Otilia, with whom as girls they had slept in the same bed, didn't even raise her eyes from her embroidery. No one said a word in her favor. Heriberto, seated in the good armchair, stirred his coffee with a little spoon, calm, like someone waiting for a minor matter to resolve itself. Before leaving the parlor, he let drop a phrase Luca wouldn't forget. "Let her go. Don Atilano. Hunger and cold educate better than any sermon. In a month she'll come back meek and grateful." He said it without anger, almost with sweetness, and that was what most disgusted Luca, that they spoke of bending her character the way one speaks of taming a filly. The maid, a woman named Petra, was the only one who squeezed her hand in the kitchen and slipped a bundle with bread and a piece of cheese into her chest. In secret, her eyes full of water. "May God go with you, child," whispered Petra. "Your grandmother was a good woman. That land isn't punishment, even if your papa believes it is." Luca didn't understand those words then. She would understand them much later. That same afternoon they put her on the wagon. Her father didn't even come out to see her off. Through the parlor window she managed to see the curtain move. Someone was watching her leave. But no one stopped her. The road to the Sierra took a whole day. Luca saw how the houses grew poorer, the roads narrower, until the cobblestone turned to dirt track, and the dirt track turned to wilderness. The wagon bounced on every stone. At midday, the driver stopped to water the mules beside a stream, and Luca ate alone the hard bread Petra had given her, sitting on a stone, looking at the blue hills that never ended. She had never been so far from everything. She had never been so alone. And though it was hard for her to admit it, there was something in that clean air that loosened the knot in her chest. When she arrived, the afternoon was already falling. Her late grandmother's house was small. A single room, a corridor, an empty corral, a twisted apple tree in the patio. The tiles were broken in one corner. The door had a brass bell hung on it, an old little bell that rang on its own when the wind pushed it. Luca stood in front of the door, with the chest at her feet, not knowing what to do with her hands. The house looked at her, and she looked at the house, like two strangers who would have to learn to live together. She had no firewood. She didn't know how to light the fire. She knew nothing. In the town, another woman would have boiled her water, made her bed, warmed her dinner. Here there was no one, only the wind and the bell. She sat on the corridor step, and for the first time since she left her house, she cried. She cried softly, with shame, as if someone might see her. Outside, the sky was turning purple over the hills. It was then that a voice from the gate made her raise her head. "Are you the granddaughter of Doa Remedios?" It was a young man of about 30, with a worn hat and a leg that he dragged just slightly as he walked. He carried a sack of firewood on his shoulder. He looked at her without curiosity, without pity, like someone looking at a person who has just arrived at a place they already know by heart. "I'm Luca," she said, wiping her face. Yes, she was my grandmother. "Tobas," he answered, and set the sack down by the door. "Your grandmother left me to look after the ranch while there was someone who'd come back. I brought you firewood. It's going to be cold." He said no more. He lit the fire with quick, sure hands, showed her where the well was, where the water, and left before she could thank him properly. At the door, the bell rang again. That night, Luca slept on a mat, wrapped in an old rebozo she found folded in her grandmother's chest. It smelled of herbs and smoke. It was the only soft thing in all that harshness. She pressed it against her face and, without knowing why, fell asleep in peace. Outside, the crickets sang, and an owl called from the apple tree. In the town, she had never heard so much silence full of living things. She thought she was going to hate this place. She didn't yet know it was going to be the opposite. The next morning, the cold of the Sierra woke her before dawn. There was no maid to bring her the coffee. There was no tablecloth. Only her, the dead fire, and the silence. Luca stayed a while without moving, feeling the weight of everything. Then she got up, went out to the corridor, and saw that by the door there was a jug of warm milk and 3 eggs in a basket. Tobas had passed by at dawn and hadn't knocked. He only left them. So the days began. Tobas arrived early, almost without speaking, and taught her without teaching. He showed her how to blow on the fire until she woke the ember, how to milk, though the first time the goat knocked over the bucket, and Luca laughed alone, surprised to be able to laugh. How to knead bread, how to dress a wound with cobweb and aguardiente, how to read the sky to know if it was going to rain. Luca, who at her house had never done anything with her hands, discovered that hands could tire and at the same time fill her with a peace she didn't know. Each morning became a rite. Luca got up with the first crow of the rooster, blew on the fire, put the water in the clay jug. At first her coffee came out watery and her milk curdled. Within a week, no longer. Tobas arrived with the firewood, left the sack by the door, and they sat a moment in the corridor to drink coffee before beginning the day. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them stopped being uncomfortable and became, little by little, a way of being accompanied. There were hard days. One morning, Luca burned a whole batch of bread and sat on the step to cry from pure rage, her hands full of flour. Tobas didn't tell her not to cry. He only picked up the burned loaves, broke them, and threw them to the hens. "The first bread always burns," he said. "Even Doa Remedios's used to burn. Tomorrow it'll come out." And the next day, it did. Little by little, Luca stopped counting the days she had been in the Sierra. At first, she crossed them off on a wall with a piece of charcoal, like a prisoner, waiting for her father to send for her. One morning she realized she had gone more than a week without crossing them off. Not because she had lost count, because she no longer wanted them to end. She frightened herself when she understood it, and erased the marks from the wall with her sleeve, as if she wanted to erase too the frightened woman who had arrived in the wagon. Her grandmother's rebozo became hers. She used it for the cold of the early morning, to carry firewood, to wipe away her sweat. She called it, in her head, the grandmother's rebozo, as if the woman she had never known well went on warming her from afar. One morning she found, in a drawer, an old notebook. It was Doa Remedios's recipe book. Yellow pages, tight handwriting, recipes for bread, for syrups, for remedies for coughs, and for the lovesickness. Luca began to bake bread following those recipes. At first it came out hard as stone. Afterward, no longer. What Luca didn't know yet was that, among her grandmother's things, there was a folded and hidden paper that was going to change everything. One afternoon, while the bread cooled in the window, Tobas arrived and stood smelling the air. "It smells like when Doa Remedios was alive," he said. And for a moment something broke in his voice. Luca learned, little by little, his story. Tobas had had a wife, a girl from the town below, Remigia, with whom he was going to stay to live in that same ranch. She and the child they were expecting died in a bad birth, 4 winters before, a stormy night when they couldn't go down to the town for the doctor. Since then, Tobas limped in his soul more than in his leg. The leg a horse had broken the same year, as if the misfortune came all at once. Doa Remedios had taken him in when he was wandering lost, sleeping in the wilderness, refusing to eat, and had given him work, had sent him to a warm bed, had spoken to him of God without preaching at him, until the boy felt like living again. That was why he looked after that ranch. For her, to pay a debt of affection that is never paid. "Your grandmother saved my life without asking me for anything," he told her once, the two of them sitting in the corridor at dusk. "I told her what for, that I was no good anymore. And she answered me that God doesn't put anyone in this world to spare, that the one who believes himself surplus is because he still hasn't found his place. People think strength is not falling. No, strength is letting someone lift you up." Luca kept that phrase the way one keeps a seed, and she stayed thinking, that night, of how many times she herself had felt surplus in her own house. The weeks passed. A man from the town below came, Don Cassiano, who had been a friend of her grandmother's, with a basket of oranges and a hen. "Doa Remedios cured my wife," he said, "and never charged me. We're here to serve you, child." A widow came, Doa Ingracia, with thread and needle to teach her to mend and to plant the garden. They came, little by little, other women of the area, drawn by the smell of the bread, first to buy, then to stay and chat under the apple tree. One brought honey, another brought seeds, another brought nothing but her wish not to be alone. The ranch that had seemed a punishment gradually filled with good people, with laughter, with voices. Luca, who in the big town had a surname and nothing more, here had for the first time a name people said with affection. She learned that the poverty of the countryside wasn't the misery she had imagined from the town. It was something else. It was a table where there was always room for one more. It was the egg the neighbor gave away even though she needed it. It was the "have you eaten, child?" they said to her on seeing her. In her big house no one had ever asked her if she had eaten. They served her. But they didn't ask, and she discovered that that simple question was worth more than all her mother's embroidered tablecloths. One afternoon of fine rain, Luca fell asleep crying again, not from sadness, but from something more confusing, because she was beginning to fear the day her father would call her back, because she was beginning not to want to return. And that, she discovered, was more frightening than the punishment. It was while she was tidying her grandmother's old chest that she found it. In the folded rebozo, sewn inside the hem, where one keeps what one doesn't want to lose, was the paper she had sensed without knowing it. She opened it carefully. It was a letter, the tight handwriting of Doa Remedios. It was addressed to her, for my granddaughter Luca, when the day comes that they send her here. Luca felt a cold rise up her back. Her grandmother had written that letter knowing that someday they would send her. "Mija," said the letter, "if you're reading this, it's because you're already in my house, and surely they sent you as punishment, the same as they sent me when I was your age for not wanting to marry the one my father arranged. Don't cry. This land isn't punishment. It's the only thing that's truly going to be yours. This house, the ranch, the apple tree, all of it is in your name from the day you were born. I left it written and signed before the notary of Psquaro with 2 witnesses, so that no one, not even your father, can take it from you. The deed is in the tin box, beneath the image of the Virgin. I also left you something more valuable than the land, a good man who looks after this. I don't impose him on you. I only ask that you see with your eyes, not with the surname." Her hands trembled. Luca ran to the shelf, lifted the image of the Virgin, and there was the tin box. Inside, the deed, folded, sealed, with the 2 names of the witnesses and that of the notary of Pátzcuaro. The house was hers. The land was hers. Her father had sent her to suffer, and without knowing it, had sent her to the only thing that would be hers in this world. The next morning, before the sun warmed, Luca went down to the town below with the deed pressed against her chest. She sought out Don Cassiano, her grandmother's old friend, who as a young man had been a scribe. He put on his glasses, read slowly, ran his finger over the seals, and when he finished, he looked at her with damp eyes. "It's good, child," he said. "It's good and it's firm. Your grandmother tied this knot well. Neither your father nor the devil can take this land from you. I was witness to many things in my life, but never to a woman who protected her granddaughter from the grave with so much care." That night, Luca didn't sleep. She looked at the letter until her candle ran out. And for the first time in a long while, she gave thanks to God, not for what had been taken from her, but for what she had found. What Luca didn't imagine was that her father was already on his way. The news that the granddaughter of Doa Remedios had made the ranch bloom, that she baked bread bought in 3 ranches around, reached the big town. And to Don Atilano, whose business with Heriberto Vargas had fallen through precisely because Luca didn't marry, a new interest in his daughter suddenly came over him, or in her land. He arrived one morning of white sun, in a cart, with Heriberto at his side. The door's bell rang when they pushed the gate without asking permission. "Luca," said Don Atilano, without greeting, "enough of this foolishness. Gather your things. Heriberto has had the kindness to forgive your insolence. You marry him next month, and this land, which is no use to a woman alone, we're going to sell. Heriberto gives a good price." Heriberto smiled, that smile of one who already feels himself the owner. Behind, at the door, Tobis stayed still, with his hat in his hand. Don Cassiano and Doa Engracia, who were helping with the bread, came over slowly. 2 other neighbors, who were coming for their afternoon bread, stayed at the gate. "Watching, father," said Luca, and she felt her heart pounding. But her voice came out firm. "Did you really cross the whole Sierra to tell me that?" "I came to correct a mistake," answered Don Atilano. "Yours and mine. Gather your things." Luca gathered nothing. She stood up straight, with her grandmother's rebozo over her shoulders, and spoke with a calm she herself didn't recognize. "This land isn't for sale, father. It's mine. It's been in my name since I was born, deeded before a notary, with witnesses. My grandmother left it signed. Here is the paper." Don Atilano was left open-mouthed. Heriberto frowned, snatched the deed from her, read it, and let it drop on the table as if it burned. It was true. There was no turning back. The deal was slipping from his hands for the second time. He looked at Don Atilano with scorn, as if the old man had sold him spoiled merchandise. "You told me the land was yours and that the girl would come to her senses," Heriberto reproached him in a low and sharp voice. "You made me lose my time and my word. Deal with your daughter yourself. I don't marry the one who doesn't bring me what was agreed." And that phrase, said in front of everyone, portrayed Heriberto entirely. He had never loved Luca. He had wanted the land. The people of the area heard it, and his face fell to the ground from shame. "You sent me here to suffer," Luca went on, without raising her voice, addressing her father. "And here I found what I never had in your house. A name people say with respect, work that tires my hands and fills my soul, and people who look me in the eyes, not at the surname." She looked then at her father, without resentment, with a clean sadness. "You threw me out. But the true home isn't the house where you're born. It's the house where you stay because they love you." Don Cassiano took a step forward and said, loud, so the whole Sierra would hear, "This girl is one of ours, Don Atilano, and whoever comes to take her land will find the whole ranch in front of him." Heriberto understood that there was no deal there. He climbed into the cart without saying more. Don Atilano stayed a moment, looking at his daughter in a strange way, like someone seeing for the first time a person who had been in front of him all along. He opened his mouth. He closed it. The forgiveness wouldn't come, because men like him don't know how to ask for it. But before climbing into the cart, he said, in a very low voice, almost to himself, "Your grandmother also told me that I didn't see with my eyes." And he left, down the dirt track, into the dust. Luca didn't follow him. But she didn't wish him ill either. She let him go, the way one lets the winter go. When spring came, the apple tree in the patio filled with white flowers. The ranch of Dos Remedios no longer seemed the place where they sent people to suffer. It smelled of fresh baked bread every morning. Don Cassiano had fixed the broken tiles. Doa and Gracia came on Sundays to sew under the apple tree. And the brass bell of the door rang all day, because there was always someone coming in or going out, with milk, with oranges, with a question, with a laugh. The house that had received Luca in silence had filled with voices, and no one would now have said it was ever alone. Tobas no longer left at dusk. He stayed to drink coffee in the corridor. And sometimes, in silence, the two of them watched the sun fall behind the hills, with the grandmother's rebozo shared over both their shoulders, because the cold came down on everyone alike. They hadn't said anything aloud. There was no need yet. What grew between them grew slowly, the way what lasts grows. One of those afternoons, Luca took out hot bread and passed a piece to Tobas. "My grandmother wrote that she left me something more valuable than the land," she said, without looking at him, her cheeks warm. Tobas didn't answer right away. He broke the bread, gave her half back, and at last said, "Doa Remedios always knew more than all of us put together." Sometimes the true home isn't the place where we're born or the family that falls to us by blood, but the forgotten corner where someone opens the door to us without asking anything in return. Sometimes they send us to suffer, believing they punish us, and without knowing it, they're pushing us toward the only land where we're truly going to bloom. What seems the end of a road is, many times, barely the first morning of the life we were destined to live. Have you ever had to choose between staying and risking everything, or leaving to protect something you didn't yet know how to name? If this story touched something in your heart, leave me your comment and tell me from which corner you're joining us. Give it a like, subscribe to Stories Between Lives, and turn on the bell. And share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to find a true home. And from then on, in that ranch in the Sierra, people stopped calling her the punished one. They began to call her, with respect, the granddaughter of Doa Remedios, the one who reopened the house,